Ruby Jennings clutched her tattered shawl tighter as the stagecoach rattled into the dusty streets of Pahrump, Nevada Territory, in the spring of 1871. The journey west had depleted her small savings, leaving her with little more than the clothes on her back and her mother's locket around her neck. Her heart raced with both hope and fear as she stepped down onto the dirt road. This wasn't how her life was supposed to unfold, but fate had dealt her a cruel hand when her parents died of fever back in Missouri, leaving their farm deeply in debt. The bustling mining town spread before her. Wooden buildings lined the main street, horses tied to hitching posts, men in dusty clothes and wide-brimmed hats moving purposefully about their business. Ruby had arrived with a letter promising work as a schoolteacher, but as she would soon discover, the position had been filled 3 weeks prior. With no return fare and winter approaching, she found herself trapped in a town where opportunities for a proper lady were scarce. Ruby adjusted her bonnet and squared her shoulders. She'd find a way to survive. She always had. After a disappointing meeting with the town council about the teaching position, Ruby found herself standing outside the Pahrump Hotel, a modest 2-story building that had seen better days. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked at her with sympathy when she inquired about a room. "That'll be 50 cents a night, miss," he said, sliding a ledger toward her. Ruby counted out her remaining money. $3.27. Less than a week's lodging. Is there somewhere more economical I might stay? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The clerk's eyes softened. Mrs. Peterson takes in boarders on occasion. Her place is at the end of Cedar Street. Might be worth asking. Mrs. Peterson, a widow with 5 children, was willing to let Ruby stay in a tiny attic room in exchange for help with childcare and housework. It wasn't ideal, but it would give Ruby time to find proper employment. Days turned into weeks as Ruby searched for work. The general store didn't need help. The dressmaker already had an apprentice. The restaurant owner looked her up and down and said he wasn't hiring her kind. By the time a month had passed, Mrs. Peterson's patience was wearing thin, and Ruby's options were dwindling. One evening, as Ruby was washing dishes after supper, Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat. "Ruby, I've been patient, but I can't feed another mouth for free any longer. My children need those extra biscuits you've been eating." Ruby's hands stilled in the soapy water. "I understand. I'll find something by the end of the week." Mrs. Peterson nodded curtly. "See that you do." That night, Ruby lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the wind rattle the loose shingles on the roof. She would not cry. Tears wouldn't put food in her belly or a roof over her head. The next morning, Ruby walked the length of the town again. She tried every respectable establishment twice over. As she passed the Silver Dollar Saloon, the owner, a heavy-set man named Otto Dugan, was sweeping the boardwalk. "Looking for work, girl," he called out, his eyes traveling over her figure in a way that made her skin crawl. Ruby hesitated. Ladies didn't work in saloons, but ladies also didn't starve in the streets. "What sort of work?" she asked cautiously. Dugan grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Serving drinks, keeping the boys company. Nothing untoward unless you want the extra money. I pay $3 a week plus room and board upstairs." Ruby swallowed hard. "Just serving drinks," Dugan shrugged. "To start. You're pretty enough to make good tips if you smile nice. And if you decide to entertain gentlemen privately, I take 30%. The implication was clear. Ruby wanted to turn and run, but where would she go? Mrs. Peterson would turn her out in 2 days, and winter was settling in with a vengeance. I'll serve drinks," she said firmly. "Nothing more." Dugan laughed. "Sure, honey, they all say that at first. Come back tonight at 7. Wear something pretty if you got it." Walking back to Mrs. Peterson's, Ruby felt numb. She'd come west to build a respectable life, not to serve whiskey to miners and cowboys. But survival came first. She would find another position as soon as possible. That night, Ruby donned her best dress, a faded blue cotton that had once belonged to her mother. She pinned her auburn hair up as neatly as she could and pinched her cheeks for color. Mrs. Peterson watched her preparations with disapproval. "The silver dollar, is it?" she asked, her voice cold. Ruby nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I'll need your room cleared by tomorrow. I can't have my children around a woman of your profession." "I'm only serving drinks," Ruby protested. Mrs. Peterson sniffed. "That's how it starts." The saloon was already crowded when Ruby arrived. The air was thick with tobacco smoke, the piano player pounding out a lively tune as men laughed and shouted over the music. Dugan led her behind the bar, gave her cursory instructions on pouring drinks, and slapped her backside before walking away. Ruby flinched, but said nothing. $3 a week and a roof. That's what mattered now. The first night was a blur of leering faces, wandering hands, and crude propositions. Ruby smiled stiffly, served drinks, and sidestepped the most aggressive patrons. When she finally climbed the narrow stairs to her new room, little more than a closet with a bed, her feet were aching and her spirit was crushed. As the weeks passed, Ruby settled into a routine. She worked from 7 until the last customer staggered out, sometimes well past midnight. She learned to dodge groping hands and deflect unwanted advances with practiced ease. But Dugan grew increasingly displeased with her refusal to entertain upstairs. "You're costing me money, girl," he growled one night after she'd rejected a wealthy mine owner's offer. "I'm not running a charity here. Our agreement was for serving drinks," Ruby reminded him. Dugan's face darkened. "Agreements change. You owe me for that room and board. I'm working for it, not enough." He grabbed a ledger from under the bar and flipped it open. "By my calculations, you're in debt to me for $20 already." "That's impossible. I've been working every night, room, board, the dress I bought you, the broken glasses, the bottle you dropped last week." He tapped the page with a grimy finger. "It adds up." Ruby stared at the ledger in disbelief. The entries were clearly inflated, but she had no way to dispute them. Dugan had been adding imaginary expenses, creating a debt she could never repay on her meager wages. "I can't pay that," she whispered. Dugan smiled coldly. "Then I suggest you start being more accommodating to the customers willing to pay extra for your time. Otherwise, I might have to involve the sheriff. Debt evasion is a serious matter." Ruby felt trapped. The sheriff was Dugan's drinking companion. She'd seen them laughing together many nights. There would be no justice for her there. That night, Ruby cried herself to sleep. She was caught in a web of debt purposely spun to force her into prostitution. Each day, Dugan added to her supposed debt, and her situation grew more desperate. 2 more weeks passed. Ruby continued to resist Dugan's pressure, but she knew she couldn't hold out much longer. The debt had climbed to $40, an impossible sum for a saloon girl to repay. Dugan had begun threatening to sell her debt to a brothel in Virginia City if she didn't comply with his demands. It was a busy Saturday night when he walked in. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He removed his hat as he entered, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. Unlike most of the patrons, he didn't immediately seek the poker tables or the company of the saloon girls. Instead, he made his way to the bar, moving with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Whiskey," he said, his voice a deep rumble that somehow carried over the saloon's din. Ruby nodded and reached for the bottle. As she poured, she noticed his hands strong and calloused from work, but clean. A working man, but not a miner. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but of good quality. "You're new," he observed, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "New enough," Ruby replied cautiously. She'd learned to be wary of friendly strangers. "Name's Grant Quinn," he said, offering no further information about himself. "Ruby." He nodded, sipping his whiskey. "You don't belong here, Ruby," she stiffened. "I don't see how that's any of your concern, Mr. Quinn." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "No offense meant, just an observation." Before she could respond, Dugan appeared, clapping a meaty hand on Grant's shoulder. "Quinn, didn't expect to see you back so soon. Thought you'd be up north with the herd till spring." "Changed plans," Grant replied, his expression giving away nothing. Dugan turned to Ruby. "This here's the best horse trainer in the territory. Got a ranch about 10 miles out. Even breaks horses for the army." Ruby nodded politely, then moved away to serve another customer. Throughout the evening, she felt Grant Quinn's eyes on her, watching as she navigated the crowded saloon. Unlike the other men, his gaze wasn't predatory or lewd. He seemed concerned. Near closing time, when the crowd had thinned, he approached her again. "How much does Dugan owe you?" he asked quietly. Ruby blinked in confusion. "I don't understand." "You've got the look of someone trapped. I know Dugan's tricks. He's done this before." Ruby glanced nervously toward Dugan, who was occupied with a card game across the room. "He says I owe him $40. Grant's jaw tightened. "For what?" "Room and board, broken glasses, a dress." She gestured helplessly. "It doesn't matter. I'll never earn enough to pay it off." "Not the way he keeps adding to it. And he's pressuring you to earn it in other ways." It wasn't a question, but Ruby nodded, her eyes downcast. Grant finished his drink and set the glass down with deliberate care. "I'll be back tomorrow." The next day passed in a haze of anxiety for Ruby. She had no reason to believe Grant Quinn would return, or that he could help her if he did. Men made promises in saloons all the time, most forgotten by morning. But as evening fell and the saloon began to fill, the door swung open and Grant walked in. This time he was freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes. He made a direct line for Dugan, who was counting money behind the bar. "Evening, Quinn," Dugan greeted him. "What brings you back so soon?" "Business," Grant replied. He placed a small leather pouch on the bar. It landed with a heavy clink of coins. "I understand Ruby here is in debt to you." Dugan's eyes narrowed. "What of it?" "I'm paying it. All of it." Ruby, who was stacking glasses nearby, froze. Dugan looked from Grant to her, then back again. $40 is what she owes," Dugan said, reaching for the pouch. Grant's hand shot out, catching Dugan's wrist. "Let's see the ledger." "No need for that. I know what she owes." "The ledger," Grant repeated, his voice steel. Dugan hesitated, then reached under the bar for the book. Grant released his wrist and flipped through the pages until he found Ruby's account. He studied it for a moment, his expression darkening. "This is fraud, Dugan, and you know it. There's no way she broke this many glasses or damaged this much property." He looked up. "But I'll pay it anyway." $40 and her debt is cleared. Dugan's face flushed with anger, but the prospect of $40 in gold was too tempting to refuse. "Fine, but she works tonight to finish out the week." "No," Grant counted out the coins from the pouch. "She's done here. Now." Ruby stood paralyzed, hardly daring to believe what was happening. Why would this man, a virtual stranger, pay such a sum for her freedom? Dugan snatched the money, his expression sullen. "Take her then. She wasn't much good anyway, too prissy for this line of work." Grant turned to Ruby. "Get your things. I'll wait." Moving in a daze, Ruby hurried upstairs to gather her meager possessions. She had little to show for her weeks at the Silver Dollar, just the clothes she'd arrived in, her mother's locket, and a hairbrush Dugan had grudgingly provided. She stuffed everything into a small cloth sack and returned downstairs. Grant was waiting by the door, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he led her outside to where a sturdy bay horse was hitched. "Mr. Quinn," Ruby finally found her voice, "I don't understand. Why would you do this?" Grant studied her face in the fading light. "No one should be trapped like that. Dugan's been running that scheme for years. Lures desperate women in, creates imaginary debts, then forces them into prostitution to pay them off. Sheriff won't do anything, he gets free drinks and women out of the arrangement. But $40. I've had a good year with the horses, I can afford it." Ruby clasped her hands tightly. "I'll repay you, every cent, I just need to find proper work." Grant nodded toward his horse. "I have a proposition for you, a proper one," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "My ranch needs a housekeeper, previous one left to get married last month. It's honest work, fair pay. $5 a week plus room and board." Ruby's mind raced. It seemed too good to be true. "Why would you offer that to someone you don't know?" "I'm a good judge of character. You don't belong in that saloon, never did." He paused. "Of course, if you'd rather try your luck elsewhere." "No," the word burst from her lips before she could stop it. She took a deep breath. "I mean, I would be grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Quinn, very grateful." For the first time, Grant smiled fully, transforming his serious face into something quite handsome. "Good. It's about 10 miles to the ranch. Can you ride?" "Yes, I grew up on a farm in Missouri." He helped her onto the horse, then mounted behind her. Ruby stiffened at the unexpected proximity, but as they rode out of town, she gradually relaxed. Whatever awaited her at Grant Quinn's ranch, it had to be better than the fate that had nearly claimed her at the Silver Dollar Saloon. The night air was crisp, stars pricking the vast Nevada sky as they rode. Ruby was acutely aware of Grant's solid presence behind her, his arms on either side as he held the reins. After the pawing hands and lewd comments she'd endured at the saloon, his respectful distance was a relief. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked, breaking the silence. 5 years, Grant replied. "Came west after the war, worked as a hand for a few ranches, saved every penny. Bought the place when the previous owner decided Nevada winters were too harsh for his liking." "You fought in the war?" "Union cavalry. Spent most of my time in Tennessee and Georgia." Ruby nodded. "My father fought as well. He came home, but he was never the same." Grant was quiet for a moment. War changes a man, some more than others. They lapsed into silence again, the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves the only sound. Ruby found herself relaxing further, the tension of the past weeks gradually easing from her shoulders. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight she was free of Dugan's threats and the Silver Dollar's oppressive walls. It was nearly midnight when Grant pointed to a cluster of lights in the distance. "Quinn Ranch. Not much to look at, but it's home." As they drew closer, Ruby could make out a modest but well-maintained ranch house, a large barn, several corrals, and a bunkhouse. A dog's bark announced their arrival, and a lantern appeared on the porch. "That'll be Hector," Grant said. "He's my foreman. Lives in the bunkhouse with the other hands, but he keeps an eye on things." An older Mexican man stepped into the light, shotgun cradled in his arms. Upon recognizing Grant, he lowered the weapon and called out a greeting in Spanish. "Brought a new housekeeper," Grant explained as they dismounted. "This is Miss Ruby Jennings. Ruby, this is Hector Mendoza. Been with me since I bought the place. Knows more about horses than I ever will." Hector nodded politely to Ruby. "Welcome, señorita. The house has been neglected since Mrs. Fletcher left." "I'll do my best to set it right," Ruby promised. "Get some sleep," Grant told Hector. "I'll take care of the horse." The older man nodded and retreated to the bunkhouse. Grant led Ruby toward the main house, carrying her small bag of possessions. "It's not much," he warned as he pushed open the door, "but it's solid. No leaks, good stove." Ruby stepped into a spacious main room that served as both parlor and dining area. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall. A worn but sturdy table with 6 chairs occupied another. Simple furniture, a sofa, 2 armchairs, a sideboard completed the room. It was neat enough, but Ruby could see a layer of dust on everything and muddy boot prints on the wooden floor. Grant lit a lamp, illuminating the space further. "Kitchen's through there," he pointed to a doorway. "My room's off the main hall and yours is upstairs. There's a second bedroom up there too, currently used for storage. Washroom's out back." "It's not what you're probably used to, it's wonderful," Ruby interrupted sincerely. After the tiny, stifling room above the saloon, this house felt like a palace. Grant looked surprised, then pleased. "Well, good. I'll show you to your room. You must be tired." The bedroom was simple but comfortable, a double bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser, a washstand with basin and pitcher, and a small writing desk beneath the window. Like the rest of the house, it needed a good dusting, but the linens on the bed appeared clean. "Mrs. Fletcher left some things that might fit you," Grant said, opening the dresser to reveal several dresses. "Until you can get into town for your own." Ruby ran a finger along the sleeve of a serviceable brown dress. "This is very kind of you." Grant shifted uncomfortably. "It's practical. Can't have a housekeeper without proper clothes." He cleared his throat. "Breakfast is usually at sunrise. There are 4 ranch hands besides Hector, all staying in the bunkhouse. They eat here in the main house." "I'll be ready," Ruby assured him. "Good night then, Miss Jennings." He tipped his head and left, closing the door behind him. Alone for the first time in what felt like forever, Ruby sank onto the bed. The events of the day seemed unreal. Just hours ago, she'd been trapped in Dugan's web of debt and threats, and now she was in a comfortable home with a respectable position. Grant Quinn had spent $40, a small fortune, to free her from that life, then offered her employment. Why? The question nagged at her as she prepared for bed. Men didn't simply rescue strange women out of the goodness of their hearts. There was always a price. But Grant had been nothing but respectful, keeping a proper distance despite their intimate ride from town. Whatever his motives, Ruby decided as she slipped under the covers, she would prove her worth as a housekeeper. She would work harder than Mrs. Fletcher ever had, make this house shine, cook the best meals these cowboys had ever tasted. And eventually, she would repay every cent of that $40. For the first time in weeks, Ruby fell asleep without fear knotting her stomach. She woke before dawn, the unfamiliar silence jarring after weeks of the saloon's constant noise. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up, newly energized. There was work to be done. Ruby dressed quickly in one of Mrs. Fletcher's cast-offs, a plain blue dress that was a bit loose in the bodice but otherwise fit well enough. She splashed water on her face from the basin, pinned up her hair, and headed downstairs to explore the kitchen. It was a good-sized room with a cast-iron stove, a dry sink, and ample cupboards. Like the rest of the house, it was basically tidy but needed a woman's touch. Ruby found coffee beans and started grinding them, then located a slab of bacon and a basket of eggs. By the time she heard movement elsewhere in the house, she had bacon frying, biscuits in the oven, and coffee percolating. Grant appeared in the doorway, his hair still damp from washing, looking surprised to find her already at work. "Good morning, Mr. Quinn," Ruby greeted him. "Breakfast will be ready shortly." "You didn't have to start so early," he said, but the appreciative look he gave the stove belied his words. "I'm an early riser, and I wanted to get a feel for the kitchen before cooking for everyone." He nodded, moving to pour himself coffee. "The men will be in soon." They're usually hungry as wolves. I'll make plenty, she promised. As the sun crested the distant mountains, the ranch hands filed in Hector, whom she'd met the night before, Miguel, a young Mexican man with a ready smile, Caleb, a lanky cowboy with a shock of red hair, and Silas, an older black man whose quiet dignity reminded Ruby of her father's foreman back in Missouri. They regarded her with curiosity as they took their places at the table, but their manners were better than most of the men she'd served at the Silver Dollar. When she brought platters of bacon, eggs, and biscuits to the table, their appreciation was evident. "Real food," Caleb sighed, loading his plate. "Not burned or raw." "I've been cooking for myself since I was 12, Grant protested mildly. "And it shows, boss," Silas replied with a straight face. Ruby bit back a smile as she refilled coffee cups. There was an easy camaraderie among these men, a mutual respect that had been entirely absent at the saloon. Even as the newcomer, she didn't feel like an outsider. After breakfast, the men headed out to their duties while Ruby tackled the kitchen cleanup. Grant lingered, helping to clear the table. "You don't need to do that," Ruby told him. "It's my job." "My mother taught me to help with dishes," he replied, stacking plates. "Said no woman should have to clean up alone after feeding hungry men." The simple statement revealed more about Grant Quinn than perhaps he intended. Ruby studied him as they worked side by side at the dry sink, the strong profile, the careful way he handled the dishes, the occasional smile that transformed his serious face. "I've got a delivery to make in town today," he said as they finished. "Army contract. I'll be gone most of the day, but the men know their work. If you need anything, Hector's usually around the barn." Ruby nodded. "I'll be fine. There's plenty to keep me busy here." Grant hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded and left. Through the window, Ruby watched him saddle a handsome chestnut gelding and ride out, his straight-backed posture and easy seat marking him as an experienced horseman. With the house to herself, Ruby set to work with a vengeance. She attacked the dust and dirt with broom and mop, scrubbed the floors until they shone, polished the few pieces of silverware until she could see her reflection. She found sheets that needed mending, curtains that needed washing, windows filmed with grime. By mid-afternoon, her back ached and her hands were red from scrubbing, but the main room and kitchen were transformed. The men returned for a quick midday meal of beans and leftover biscuits, their appreciative glances at the clean space not lost on Ruby. As the sun began to set, she prepared a heartier supper of venison stew she found in the cold storage, cornbread, and stewed apples for dessert. The delicious smells filled the house, and Ruby found herself watching the road for Grant's return. It was only proper concern for her employer, she told herself. Nothing more. She heard the hoofbeats before she saw him, the steady rhythm announcing his approach. Through the window, she watched as he dismounted smoothly and led his horse toward the barn. There was something about the way he moved, confident but not cocky, strong but not showy, that drew her eye. When Grant entered the house 20 minutes later, freshly washed and in a clean shirt, he stopped abruptly, looking around in amazement. "Did Mrs. Fletcher come back?" he asked, only half joking. Ruby smiled, pleased by his reaction. "No, just me. This place hasn't looked this good since." He trailed off, running a hand along the now gleaming sideboard. "Well, maybe ever." "That's what you hired me for," Ruby reminded him, but she couldn't help feeling proud. "At this rate, you'll work off that $40 in no time," he said, then immediately looked like he regretted the words. "I didn't mean it's all right," Ruby interrupted. "I do intend to repay you." "Every cent." Grant's expression softened. "There's no rush, Miss Jennings, and no obligation. That debt to Dugan wasn't legitimate." It matters to me, she said firmly. I pay my debts, real ones. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I understand. But don't work yourself to illness trying to repay it. This house has stood for 15 years. It can wait another day for perfection. The ranch hands arrived for supper, their exclamations over the transformed house and delicious meal bringing a flush of pleasure to Ruby's cheeks. She ate with them at Grant's insistence, though she would have preferred to serve and eat later. The conversation flowed easily, the men sharing stories of the day's work, careful to include her without making her uncomfortable. After the meal, when the men had returned to the bunkhouse and Ruby was washing the last of the dishes, Grant approached her again. I've been thinking about your wages, he said. Ruby tensed. Was he already regretting his offer? Is $5 too much? No, Grant replied quickly. Actually, I was thinking it's not enough, given the transformation you've already worked here. $7 seems fairer. Ruby nearly dropped the plate she was drying. 7. But that's what your work is worth, Grant finished firmly. I pay fair wages for good work, Miss Jennings. And yours is exceptional. She stared at him, searching for signs of an ulterior motive, but found only sincerity in his gray eyes. Thank you, Mr. Quinn, that's very generous, he shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. It's just business. He turned to go, then paused. And Miss Jennings. Please call me Grant. Mr. Quinn makes me feel like my father. Then you must call me Ruby, she replied, a small smile playing at her lips. Ruby, he repeated, as if testing the name. Good night, then. Good night, Grant. In the days that followed, Ruby settled into life at Quinn Ranch. She continued her cleaning crusade, tackling one room at a time until the entire house gleamed. She learned the men's preferences. Hector liked his coffee strong. Silas had a sweet tooth. Miguel couldn't abide onions. Caleb would eat anything put in front of him, and Grant preferred simple, hearty meals over fancy concoctions. Grant himself was often busy with the horses, which were the main business of the ranch. He raised and trained stock for the army, local ranchers, and occasionally wealthy private buyers. Ruby caught glimpses of him working in the corral with a spirited young mare, or discussing breeding plans with Hector. He had a gift with the animals, a patient firmness that earned their trust. A week after her arrival, Ruby rode into Pahrump with Grant for supplies. She was nervous about returning to the town where she'd suffered such humiliation, but Grant seemed to sense her anxiety. We'll avoid the silver dollar, he promised as they approached the town limits. Dugan's bark is worse than his bite, especially now that he's got his money. The general store owner, who had refused to hire Ruby just weeks earlier, now greeted her warmly as Mrs. Quinn's housekeeper. The correction died on Ruby's lips when she saw the respect with which the townspeople treated Grant. Better to let them assume what they wanted than to remind them of her brief, shameful tenure at the saloon. As they loaded supplies into the wagon, Ruby noticed a woman across the street watching them intently. She was expensively dressed, with a fashionable hat and parasol. Who is that? Ruby asked quietly. Grant glanced up, his expression cooling. Victoria Harrington. Her father owns the largest ranch in the county, and the bank. The woman approached, her smile aimed exclusively at Grant. Why, Mr. Quinn, what a pleasant surprise. Father was just saying he hadn't seen you in an age. Miss Harrington. Grant tipped his hat politely but without warmth. I've been busy with the new army contract. Victoria's eyes flicked dismissively over Ruby before returning to Grant. You must come to dinner soon. Father has a business proposition for you. Please thank your father, but I'm afraid I'm fully committed at present. Victoria's smile tightened. Perhaps another time, then. She nodded curtly to Ruby and continued down the street, her back straight as a ramrod. She doesn't like me. Ruby observed as they climbed into the wagon. Grant's mouth quirked. Miss Harrington doesn't like any woman under 40. She's been trying to secure a husband for years, and I'm apparently on her list of candidates. Oh, Ruby wasn't sure why this information bothered her. She's very beautiful. She's also cold as a winter creek and twice as shallow, Grant replied bluntly, flicking the reins to start the horses moving. Her father wants my land to expand his holdings. Marrying me off to Victoria would be an efficient way to get it. Would you ever consider it? Ruby asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. It would be a good match, financially speaking. Grant looked at her as if she'd suggested he jump off a cliff. I'd sooner marry one of my horses. At least they have genuine affection for me. The vehemence in his voice made Ruby laugh, breaking the strange tension that had gripped her. They spent the ride back discussing more practical matters, the winter supplies they'd need, improvements to the house, plans for the Christmas season that was rapidly approaching. As November deepened toward December, the Nevada landscape transformed. Frost rimmed the windows each morning, and the distant mountains wore caps of snow. Ruby added extra blankets to all the beds and kept the fire burning steadily in the main room's hearth. On a particularly cold evening, as she sat darning socks by the fire after the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Grant joined her, a book in his hand. They often spent evenings this way now, she with her mending or knitting, he reading or going over ranch accounts. The comfortable silence between them was a new experience for Ruby, who had grown up in a house full of siblings and then endured the constant noise of the saloon. "May I ask you something personal?" Grant said suddenly, setting his book aside. Ruby looked up, needle poised. "Of course." "How did you end up at the Silver Dollar? You don't have to answer if it's too painful." Ruby sighed, her hands stilling in her lap. "It's not a very original story. My parents died last year. Fever took them both within a week of each other. The farm was mortgaged and the bank foreclosed. I had a teaching certificate but couldn't find a position nearby. Then I saw an advertisement for a school teacher needed in Pahrump. I spent nearly everything I had to get here, only to find the position filled." Grant nodded, his expression somber, "and with no money to leave." "Exactly, Mrs. Peterson took me in for a while, but she has 5 children and barely enough to feed them. When Dugan offered me work," she shrugged, "it seemed better than starving in the street." "You're educated then?" "Yes, father believed girls should learn as much as boys. I attended the normal school in Jefferson City." Grant looked thoughtful. "Pahrump still needs a proper school. The minister's wife teaches the younger children in the church 3 days a week, but there's talk of building a schoolhouse come spring." Ruby's heart leaped. "A real school?" "From what I hear, town's growing fast enough to need one." He studied her face. "Would that interest you, teaching instead of housekeeping?" "I love teaching," Ruby admitted, "but I wouldn't want to leave." She trailed off, suddenly aware of how that might sound. Grant's eyes warmed. "You've become invaluable here, Ruby, but I wouldn't want to hold you back from your true calling. Perhaps I could do both, at least until you find another housekeeper. The school would only be during the day." "We'll see what develops in the spring," Grant promised. He hesitated, then added, "I've grown accustomed to these evenings. I'd miss them." The simple admission sent warmth spreading through Ruby's chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "So would I." Their gazes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Grant cleared his throat and returned to his book, and Ruby bent over her mending, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted subtly. As Christmas approached, Ruby threw herself into preparations. She baked cookies and pies, decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, and secretly worked on gifts for Grant and the ranch hands. For Hector, she knitted a warm scarf. For Miguel, A new shirt sewn from fabric purchased in town. For Caleb, thick winter socks. For Sela's, a carved chess set she found at the general store. For Grant, she embarked on her most ambitious project, a quilt made from scraps of fabric she'd collected, worked on late at night after everyone else was asleep. Grant himself seemed caught up in the holiday spirit, bringing home a small pine tree which they decorated with popcorn strings and paper ornaments. He disappeared into town more frequently, always returning with mysteriously shaped packages that he hid in his room. On Christmas Eve, after a festive supper where even the usually reserved Hector joined in singing carols, Grant asked Ruby to stay behind when the men returned to the bunkhouse. "I have something for you," he said, disappearing into his room and returning with a wrapped package. "I thought you might want to open it tonight, privately." Ruby touched the package with trembling fingers. It had been beautifully wrapped in silver paper with a blue ribbon. "I have something for you too," she admitted, retrieving the quilt she'd hidden in the kitchen. Grant's eyes widened as she presented it to him. "You made this. When did you have time?" "I worked on it at night after you went to bed," Ruby explained, suddenly shy. "It's nothing fancy." "It's beautiful," Grant said firmly, running his hand over the careful stitching. "No one's made anything like this for me since my mother died." "Open yours now," he urged, gesturing to the package. Ruby carefully untied the ribbon and removed the paper to reveal a wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, lay a silver locket on a delicate chain. It was intricately engraved with a pattern of flowers and birds. "Grant," she breathed, lifting it reverently. "It's exquisite." "Open it," he encouraged. Inside was a tiny photograph, a perfect miniature of Quinn Ranch, with the house and barn clearly visible. On the opposite side was an inscription: "Home is where the heart finds peace." Ruby's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect, but you've already done so much for me." "You've done more," Grant replied, his voice low and sincere. "This house wasn't a home until you came." Ruby looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Slowly, he reached out to take the locket from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. "May I?" he asked. She nodded wordlessly and turned, lifting her hair so he could fasten the chain around her neck. His fingers were warm against her skin, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. When she turned back to face him, he was closer than before. "Ruby," he said softly, "I'm not good with words, never have been, but these past weeks, having you here." He shook his head, frustrated with his own ineloquence. "I feel it too," she whispered, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. Grant's expression lightened with relief and something more. "I don't want you to feel obligated. The debt to Dugan, the job here, none of that should factor into." "Into what?" Ruby asked when he hesitated. Instead of answering, Grant reached out to touch her cheek, his calloused fingertips surprisingly gentle. "May I kiss you, Ruby Jennings?" Her heart pounding like a stampeding herd, Ruby nodded. Grant leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so tender it brought fresh tears to her eyes. Unlike the forced kisses she'd dodged at the saloon, this one asked rather than demanded, gave rather than took. When they finally parted, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the night I brought you here." Ruby smiled through her tears. "What took you so long, Cowboy?" His laugh was soft and warm against her lips. "Wasn't sure you'd welcome it. Wanted to give you time to settle in, to be sure you were comfortable here." "I've never felt more at home anywhere," Ruby admitted. "Even before this." She gestured between them. Grant's arms tightened around her waist. "I was hoping you'd say that." Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the Nevada landscape transformed by a dusting of snow that had fallen overnight. Ruby woke early, her heart light with the memory of Grant's kiss, and the several that had followed before they reluctantly said good night. The ranch hands were delighted with their gifts, and in return presented Ruby with a beautiful wooden sewing box they had collaborated on, Sela's having built it and the others contributing to the contents. Grant received a new saddle blanket they had commissioned from a local weaver. The day passed in a haze of food, laughter, and warmth. If the men noticed the frequent glances between their boss and the housekeeper, or the way their hands sometimes met when passing dishes, they were tactful enough not to mention it. That evening, after another round of carols and stories by the fire, the men bid them good night with knowing smiles. When the door closed behind them, Grant immediately crossed to Ruby and pulled her into his arms. "I've been waiting to do this all day," he murmured before capturing her lips in a kiss that left her breathless. "They know," Ruby said when they finally broke apart. "The men," Grant chuckled. "Of course they know. Hector's been giving me advice about courting you for weeks." "Courting?" Ruby pulled back slightly to look at his face. "Is that what you're doing? Trying to, anyway?" Grant suddenly looked uncertain. "Unless I've misread," Ruby silenced him with a kiss of her own. "You haven't misread anything, I just wasn't sure what this was to you." Grant led her to the sofa and sat, pulling her down beside him. "Ruby, when I saw you in that saloon, something inside me recognized you, not just as someone in trouble but as someone important. I couldn't explain it then, and I'm not sure I can now. But these past weeks have only confirmed what I somehow knew that first night." "What's that?" Ruby asked softly. "That you belong here with me." He took her hands in his. "I know it's fast. We've barely known each other a month, but I've never been more certain of anything." Ruby's heart felt too full for her chest. "I feel the same way. It's as if I've been searching for something my whole life without knowing what it was, and then I found it here." Grant lifted her hand to his lips. "I want to do this properly, court you the way you deserve. And when you're ready, if you ever are, I want to offer you my name, not just my home." Ruby's eyes widened. "Are you proposing?" "Not yet," Grant smiled. "That'll come with a ring and maybe even a new suit if I can find one that fits. This is a statement of intent. So you know where my heart stands." "And where does it stand?" Ruby asked, needing to hear the words. Grant's gaze was steady and sure. "With you, Ruby Jennings. Completely with you." The weeks following Christmas were the happiest of Ruby's life. Her relationship with Grant deepened daily, their evenings filled with conversations that often lasted well into the night. They discovered shared interests in books and music, similar views on politics and religion, and complementary visions for the future. During the day, Ruby continued her duties as housekeeper, but Grant insisted on paying her full wages. "This isn't about the money anymore," he explained when she protested. "You've earned it fairly, and I won't have my future wife saying I took advantage of her labor." Future wife. The words sent a thrill through Ruby each time he used them, which was increasingly often. Their courtship, while accelerated by frontier standards, was conducted with propriety. Grant was careful to maintain appearances, never entering her bedroom or showing inappropriate affection in front of the men. But when they were alone, his kisses grew more passionate, his embrace more urgent, and Ruby found her own desires awakening in response. January brought bitter cold and several snowstorms that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Ruby was grateful for the well-stocked pantry and cellar, ensuring they had plenty of food despite being unable to reach town. The forced confinement brought the household closer, with evenings spent playing cards or checkers, telling stories, or simply enjoying the warmth of the fire and each other's company. It was during one such snowbound evening, with the wind howling outside and the ranch hands having retired early, that Grant finally proposed properly. He had asked Ruby to read to him from a book of poetry they both enjoyed. And as she finished a particularly moving verse, she looked up to find him on one knee before her, a small velvet box in his hand. "Ruby Jennings," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "These past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. You've transformed my house into a home and my heart from a solitary thing into something full and alive. I can't imagine a day without you in it." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Ruby's eyes as she set aside the book. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Grant Quinn, I will marry you." His hands were trembling slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise. They agreed to marry in April, when the worst of winter would be past and travel easier for the few guests they wanted to invite. Ruby had no family left, but she had formed friendships with several women in town, particularly the minister's wife, Mrs. Powell, who had taken her under her wing. Grant had a younger sister in California whom he was determined should attend. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Pahrump. Most reactions were positive, the ranch hands were openly delighted, and most townspeople offered sincere congratulations. Victoria Harrington's tight-lipped acknowledgement was the exception, though her father cordially invited them both to dinner, an invitation Grant finally accepted. "We'll need to maintain good relations with the bank," he explained to Ruby as they dressed for the dinner, and showing them where a united front might discourage any further matrimonial schemes from Victoria. The Harrington estate was by far the grandest home Ruby had ever entered, with imported furniture, crystal chandeliers, and uniformed servants. Victoria played the gracious hostess with frigid perfection, while her father, a shrewd-eyed man with a calculating smile, dominated the conversation with questions about Grant's breeding program and plans for expansion. "You're sitting on prime land, Quinn," Harrington said over brandy, while the women were supposedly engaged in separate conversation across the room. "With the right investment, you could triple your operation." "I'm content with my current scale," Grant replied mildly. "It allows me to maintain quality." Harrington's eyes narrowed. "Quality's all well and good, but quantity pays the bills. You should consider my offer to buy the north section of your property. It's barely used, and I could put it to work immediately." "That section contains the best spring on my land," Grant pointed out, "not to mention the best grazing for my mares and foals. I'd allow you water rights, of course, and a fair price, say $15 an acre." Ruby, who had been listening while pretending to admire a porcelain figurine Victoria was describing, saw Grant's jaw tighten. "That land isn't for sale, Mr. Harrington, at any price." The banker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everything has a price, Quinn, even principles." The drive home was quiet, both of them processing the evening. Finally, Ruby asked, "Is $15 an acre really a fair price?" Grant snorted. "It's robbery. That land's worth 30 at least with the water rights, but even at 100 I wouldn't sell to Harrington. He's trying to control the entire valley, buying out smaller ranchers one by one. He doesn't seem like a man who takes rejection well. He isn't." Grant's hands tightened on the reins. "He's used to getting his way by fair means or foul. Should we be worried?" Grant glanced at her, his expression softening. "No. Harrington's tactics are usually financial, calling in loans unexpectedly, manipulating cattle prices. But I own my land free and clear, and my army contracts are secure. He can't touch us." Ruby nodded, but a shadow of unease lingered. Powerful men unused to hearing no could be dangerous, especially to those who defied them. Her concerns seemed unfounded as February turned to March and preparations for their wedding moved forward. Ruby ordered fabric from San Francisco for her wedding dress, a simple but elegant design in ivory silk. Grant expanded his house, adding a proper study and enlarging the master bedroom. They discussed plans for the future children they hoped for, improvements to the ranch, Ruby's potential return to teaching once the school was built. One bright March afternoon, Ruby rode into town alone to finalize arrangements with Reverend Powell and collect mail. Grant had been reluctant to let her go unescorted, but she had insisted. "I'm perfectly capable of driving a wagon 6 miles," she reminded him, "and you're needed here for that army inspector." "At least take Caleb with you," Grant argued. "You need every hand for those horses," Ruby countered, kissing him soundly. "I'll be fine, back before sunset." The trip into town was uneventful, the road dry and easy to navigate. Ruby completed her errands efficiently, picked up a stack of mail including a letter from Grant's sister confirming she would attend the wedding, and was preparing to leave when she noticed Victoria Harrington emerging from her father's bank. On impulse, Ruby approached her. "Miss Harrington," she called. "Might I have a word?" Victoria turned, her perfect features arranged in a mask of polite interest. "Miss Jennings, what can I do for you?" "I wanted to thank you for your hospitality last month," Ruby said sincerely. "And to say that I hope there are no hard feelings between us." Victoria's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Hard feelings? Whatever for? I know you had. An interest in Grant before I arrived. I wouldn't want my presence to create tension in the community." For a moment, Victoria's mask slipped, revealing genuine surprise. Then she laughed, a sound with little humor in it. "My dear Miss Jennings, while Grant Quinn is certainly handsome and his ranch has potential, he was never more than one possibility among many. My father had business interests in his land, that's all." Ruby wasn't entirely convinced, but she nodded. "Then I'm glad there's no awkwardness." "None whatsoever." Victoria's smile was sharp as a knife. "Though I do hope you realize what you're getting into. Frontier life can be so brutal for a woman of limited means, and accidents happen so frequently." The words were spoken casually, but a chill ran down Ruby's spine. "What do you mean by that?" Victoria patted her arm condescendingly. "Only that life is uncertain, especially in such wild country. One should always be prepared for changes in circumstance." With a final brittle smile, she turned and walked away, her expensive skirts rustling. Ruby stood frozen, the conversation replaying in her mind. Had that been a threat, a warning, or simply Victoria's attempt to unsettle a rival? Lost in thought, she didn't notice the man approaching until he spoke. Well, if it ain't little Ruby from the Silver Dollar." Ruby's head snapped up to find Otto Dugan blocking her path to the wagon, his familiar leer sending a wave of revulsion through her. "Mr. Dugan," she acknowledged stiffly, trying to step around him. He moved to block her again. "Heard you're playing house with Quinn now. Got yourself a real step up, didn't you? From saloon girl to rancher's wife." "Please let me pass," Ruby said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. Dugan leaned closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "Quinn paid good money for you, $40. I've been wondering if he got his money's worth." Ruby raised her chin. "That's none of your business." "Maybe not." Dugan shrugged. "But I've been thinking. Maybe I should tell the good people of Pahrump exactly what kind of woman their new schoolteacher used to be, serving more than drinks at the Silver Dollar." "That's a lie," Ruby hissed, anger overcoming her fear. "I never. Who's going to believe you over me?" Dugan smirked. "Respectable folk don't usually take the word of a saloon girl over a business owner." Ruby's hands clenched at her sides. "What do you want, Dugan?" "Just a little compensation for my lost investment," Say, $20 to keep my mouth shut about your past activities. I have no money with me, Ruby replied coldly. And even if I did, I wouldn't give you a cent for lying about me. Dugan's face darkened. You think you're too good for the likes of me now. Remember your place, girl. Quinn might not want you anymore once everyone knows where he found you. Is there a problem here? The deep voice came from behind Ruby. She turned to find Silas standing there, his expression hard as he looked at Dugan. No problem, Dugan muttered, backing away. Just having a friendly chat with an old employee. Silas stepped forward, placing himself between Ruby and the saloon owner. Miss Ruby doesn't work for you anymore, and she never will again. Now move along before I forget my manners. Despite Silas being older and unarmed, something in his steady gaze made Dugan falter. With a final glare at Ruby, he turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. Are you all right, Miss Ruby? Silas asked once Dugan was out of earshot. Ruby nodded, her hands still trembling slightly. Yes. Thank you, Silas. What are you doing in town? Boss sent me to keep an eye on you, Silas admitted. Said he had a bad feeling. Instead of being annoyed at Grant's overprotectiveness, Ruby felt a rush of gratitude. I'm glad he did. Dugan was unpleasant. What did he want? Money. To keep quiet about my time at the saloon, Ruby's voice wavered. He threatened to tell everyone that I did things I never did. Silas's expression hardened further. That man's trouble, always has been, but don't you worry about his lies. Folks around here know a decent woman when they see one. Do they? Ruby asked quietly. Or will they believe the worst because it's more interesting than the truth? Those worth knowing will believe the truth, Silas said firmly. The rest don't matter. They rode back to the ranch together, Silas driving his horse alongside Ruby's wagon. She told him about her encounter with Victoria as well, unsure if she was overreacting to what might have been nothing more than a spiteful comment. Silas listened thoughtfully. Miss Harrington's used to getting her way almost as much as her daddy, and neither of them likes losing. You think she meant it as a threat? Hard to say. But I'd watch my back around both Harringtons. They play dirty when crossed. Grant was waiting anxiously when they arrived, having finished with the Army inspector earlier than expected. His relief at seeing them turned to anger when Silas explained what had happened in town. I'll kill him, Grant growled, pacing the kitchen while Ruby prepared supper. Going after you like that, threatening you, Grant, please, Ruby interrupted. Violence won't solve anything. It might even make things worse. She's right, boss, Silas agreed. Dugan's the type to escalate, and the Harringtons have too much influence to confront directly. Grant ran a hand through his hair in frustration. So what? We just let them threaten Ruby. Wait for them to act. We be careful, Ruby said firmly. I won't go to town alone again. We'll make sure everyone knows the truth about my time at the saloon, that I served drinks only, and only because I was desperate. And we'll watch for any move from the Harringtons. Grant's expression softened as he looked at her. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise, Ruby replied with a small smile. You're just finally noticing. Despite their vigilance in the following weeks, nothing untoward happened. Dugan stayed away from Ruby on her infrequent visits to town, always accompanied by Grant or one of the ranch hands. Victoria Harrington left for San Francisco to shop for a spring wardrobe, according to town gossip. Even Mr. Harrington seemed to have accepted Grant's refusal to sell, focusing his attention on other properties in the valley. As their April wedding date approached, Ruby allowed herself to relax and enjoy the preparations. The dress was finished, a beautiful creation that transformed her from housekeeper to bride. The guest list was modest, but meaningful. Grant's sister, Emily, and her husband would arrive by stagecoach 3 days before the ceremony. Reverend and Mrs. Powell would officiate and host the small reception at the church. The ranch hands would stand as witnesses, and several townspeople Ruby had befriended would attend. The night before Emily was due to arrive, Ruby was putting the finishing touches on the spare bedroom when Grant came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Nervous," he murmured against her ear. Ruby leaned back into his embrace. "About meeting your sister, a little." "She'll love you," Grant assured her. "She's been writing for months that I need to find a good woman before I turn into a crusty old bachelor." "And did you find a good woman?" Grant turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "I found the best woman. The only woman I could ever imagine spending my life with." Ruby's heart swelled with love as she rose on tiptoes to kiss him. "4 more days until I'm Mrs. Grant Quinn." "Not soon enough," Grant growled playfully, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. "Your sister will be here tomorrow," Ruby reminded him, reluctantly pulling away. "And there's still so much to do." Grant sighed dramatically. "Always so practical, my Ruby. All right, I'll let you finish. But after the wedding." His suggestive grin sent heat coursing through her. "After the wedding," Ruby agreed, her own smile promising everything words couldn't express. The next day they drove to town to meet the stagecoach from Carson City. Ruby had fretted over her appearance, wanting to make a good impression on Grant's only living relative. She wore her second-best dress, a deep blue that complemented her auburn hair, and the silver locket Grant had given her for Christmas. "You look beautiful," Grant assured her for the 3rd time as they waited outside the stage depot. "Emily will adore you." The stagecoach arrived in a cloud of dust, and a moment later a petite blonde woman was flying into Grant's arms. "Grant!" "Oh, it's been too long," Grant laughed, spinning his sister in a circle before setting her down. "Emily, you look wonderful. California clearly agrees with you." Emily beamed up at her brother, then turned curious eyes to Ruby. "And this must be the woman who finally captured my impossible brother's heart, Ruby Jennings." Ruby introduced herself, extending a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Instead of taking her hand, Emily pulled her into a warm embrace. "We're going to be sisters. That calls for a hug, not a handshake." Ruby returned the hug, her nervousness melting away at Emily's genuine warmth. Emily's husband, James, a tall man with kind eyes and a quiet manner, shook hands with Grant and offered Ruby a gentle smile. "Emily's been talking about nothing but this wedding for weeks," he confided. "I think she's more excited than you two are." "Impossible," Grant declared, slipping an arm around Ruby's waist. They collected Emily and James's luggage and headed back to the ranch, the conversation flowing easily between them. Emily peppered Ruby with questions about her background, her meeting with Grant, and their plans for the future. But her interest seemed born of genuine affection rather than prying. "I knew the moment Grant mentioned you in his first letter that this was different," Emily confided as they prepared supper together that evening. "He's never written about a woman that way before." "What way?" Ruby asked, curious. Emily smiled. "Like she was the sun, and he'd been in darkness his whole life without knowing it. His exact words were, 'She brings light to every room, Em, not just with her smile but with her spirit.'" Ruby blushed, touched by Grant's words to his sister. "He never told me that." "Men rarely say such things directly," Emily laughed. "But he loves you desperately, Ruby. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "I love him too," Ruby said simply, "more than I ever thought possible." Emily squeezed her hand. "Then my brother is a very lucky man." The days leading up to the wedding passed in a whirl of final preparations. The house was cleaned from top to bottom. Food was prepared for the small reception, and Ruby's dress was pressed and ready. The night before the ceremony, after a festive dinner with Emily, James, and the ranch hands, Ruby retired early to her room, both excited and nervous about the day to come. She was just preparing for bed when a soft knock came at her door. Opening it a crack, she found Emily standing there in her nightgown, a small package in her hands. "I hope I'm not intruding," Emily said, "but I wanted to give you this privately." Ruby opened the door wider, letting her in. "Of course not. What is it?" Emily handed her the package. "A wedding gift from me to you. A bit of a tradition in our family." Ruby unwrapped the paper to reveal a small, leather-bound book. Opening it, she discovered handwritten recipes, household hints, and what appeared to be private reflections. "It was our mother's," Emily explained. "She started it when she married our father. The recipes are hers and some from her mother before her. The last few pages are mine, things I've learned since marrying James. I thought you might like to add your own wisdom to it as your life with Grant unfolds." Tears sprang to Ruby's eyes as she carefully turned the pages, reading snippets of advice from women she would never meet but who were now, in a way, her family too. "Emily, this is precious. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll cherish it as we have," Emily replied softly. "And that someday you'll pass it on to your daughter or daughter-in-law." Ruby embraced her soon-to-be sister, holding the book carefully. "I will, thank you." Emily smiled, wiping away her own tears. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow you become a Quinn, and heaven knows we're a handful." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the Nevada spring offering its best weather for the occasion. Ruby woke early, too excited to sleep, and stood at her window watching the sun rise over the mountains that had become her home. In a few hours, she would walk down the aisle of Pahrump's small church to marry Grant Quinn, the man who had saved her from a life of degradation, who had offered her not just his name but his heart, who looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. From saloon girl to rancher's wife, it seemed impossible, yet here she was. Emily helped her dress, arranging her auburn hair in an elegant style adorned with small white flowers, fastening the silver locket around her neck, and finally assisting with the ivory silk gown that transformed Ruby into a bride. "You look radiant," Emily declared, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "My brother won't know what hit him." Ruby smoothed the silk skirt, her hands trembling slightly. "I can hardly believe this is real." "Believe it," Emily said firmly. "You deserve every happiness, Ruby, and so does Grant." The small church was filled with flowers when they arrived, spring blooms gathered from gardens around town, and arranged by Mrs. Powell and her ladies' circle. The pews were filled with a modest gathering townspeople who had come to respect Ruby, neighbors from surrounding ranches, and a contingent of soldiers from the fort who had worked with Grant on his army contracts. And at the front, waiting beside Reverend Powell, stood Grant. He had traded his usual ranch clothes for a new black suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that caught Ruby's breath, the look of pure joy and love as he watched her walk toward him on James's arm. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Ruby remembered exchanging vows, her voice steady despite the emotion swelling in her chest. She remembered the weight of the gold band as Grant slid it onto her finger, the warmth of his hand holding hers, the soft kiss that sealed their union. "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Grant Quinn," Reverend Powell announced to the applause of their guests. As they turned to face their friends, Ruby caught sight of a latecomer standing at the back of the church, Victoria Harrington, her expression unreadable. She had returned from San Francisco just the day before, according to Emily's gossip. Her presence at the wedding was unexpected, but Ruby refused to let it disturb her happiness. The reception at the church hall was a joyful affair, with abundant food, music from a local fiddler, and even dancing. Grant kept Ruby close, proudly introducing her as my wife to everyone they encountered. "Happy Mrs. Quinn," he murmured during a quiet moment. Ruby's heart soared at the new name. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." As the celebration continued, Victoria Harrington approached them, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Congratulations to you both. How charming to see true love conquer all obstacles." "Thank you, Miss Harrington," Grant replied neutrally. "It was kind of you to attend." Victoria's gaze settled on Ruby. "I do hope your past won't cast too long a shadow over your future, Mrs. Quinn. Small towns have such long memories." Before Ruby could respond, Grant's arm tightened around her waist. "My wife's past is honorable, Miss Harrington. She survived circumstances that would have broken many, with her dignity and principles intact. If anyone in this town can't see that, it's their loss, not ours." Victoria's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of genuine anger before her mask of polite interest returned. "How gallant! Well, I wish you both every happiness. Do enjoy the day." With a final insincere smile she departed. "Don't let her spoil this," Grant murmured, turning Ruby to face him. "She's bitter and jealous, nothing more." Ruby looked up at her husband, her heart full. "She can't touch us, Grant. Nothing can." As the sun began to set, they bid farewell to their guests and departed for the ranch, their home, now truly shared. The ranch hands, along with Emily and James, had conspired to decorate the house for their return, with lanterns lighting the path to the door and fresh flowers in every room. But it was their bedroom the master suite Grant had expanded, and Ruby had prepared with new curtains and bedding that took her breath away. Someone, likely Emily, had scattered rose petals across the quilt and placed candles on every surface, creating a romantic haven for their first night as husband and wife. Standing in the doorway, Ruby felt a momentary shyness overcome her. Despite their passionate kisses and embraces over the past months, they had maintained propriety, saving this ultimate intimacy for marriage. Now, as Grant closed the door behind them, she found herself suddenly nervous. Grant seemed to sense her hesitation. "We don't have to rush anything, Ruby," he said gently, taking her hands in his. "We have all the time in the world." Ruby looked up at him, at the love and patience in his eyes, and her nervousness melted away. "I don't want to wait," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "I've waited my whole life to feel this way, to be with someone who sees me, the real me. I want to be your wife in every way, Grant Quinn." His eyes darkened with desire as he bent to kiss her, a kiss that held all the passion they had restrained until now. His hands were gentle as he helped her out of her wedding dress, his touches reverent as he discovered her body. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, Ruby knew that all the hardships she had endured had led her to this moment, this man, this perfect union of hearts and bodies. Later, as they lay entwined in the quiet darkness, Grant traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy," he admitted. "After the war, I figured I'd live my life alone. The ranch was enough, until you." Ruby pressed a kiss to his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her lips. "Until you," she echoed. "My savior, my love." "Not a savior," Grant corrected, tipping her chin up to look into her eyes. "A partner. That's what we are now, Ruby Quinn, partners in everything." As spring turned to summer, Ruby settled into her role as Grant's wife with joy and purpose. The ranch prospered under their joint care, Grant managing the horses and land, Ruby overseeing the household and accounts. They worked side by side, making decisions together, building a life that exceeded both their dreams. Word came that the town council had approved funding for a proper schoolhouse, to be completed by fall. Ruby was offered the position of teacher, which she accepted with the provision that school hours would allow her to maintain her duties at the ranch. Grant fully supported her return to teaching, even helping to design her classroom and build sturdy desks for the students. "You were meant for this," he told her after watching her develop lesson plans one evening. "Teaching, nurturing minds, I'm proud of you." Life wasn't without its challenges. Victoria Harrington continued her campaign of subtle slights whenever they encountered her in town. Otto Dugan spread rumors about Ruby's past, though they gained little traction against the respect she had earned in the community. And Mr. Harrington persisted in his efforts to acquire the north section of Quinn land, though his tactics remained financial rather than threatening. But these were minor shadows against the bright happiness of their life together. Each evening, Ruby thanked whatever fate or providence had led her to Pahrump and placed her in Grant's path. From desperate circumstances had come unimaginable joy. In August, as the summer heat began to wane, Ruby made a discovery that added to their happiness. After several mornings of unexplained nausea, she visited the town doctor during a supply run. "Congratulations, Mrs. Quinn," the doctor said after his examination. "You're about 2 months along. The baby should arrive in early spring." Ruby rode home in a daze of joy, hardly able to contain the news until Grant returned from the north pasture. When he finally rode in, dusty and tired from a day of training colts, she met him at the corral, unable to wait even for him to dismount. "Grant," she called, her face glowing with her secret, "I have news." He swung down from his horse, concern crossing his features at her unusual greeting. "What is it? Is something wrong?" Ruby shook her head, taking his hands in hers. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's perfect." She placed his palm against her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Grant's expression transformed from concern to wonder. "A baby, you're sure?" Dr. Wilson confirmed it today. "He thinks late March or early April." For a moment, Grant simply stared at his hand on her abdomen, as if trying to comprehend the miracle beneath it. Then, with a whoop of joy that startled the horses, he lifted Ruby off her feet and spun her in a circle. "A baby," he shouted, loud enough for the entire ranch to hear. "Ruby's having a baby." The ranch hands emerged from the barn and bunkhouse, grinning at their boss's uncharacteristic display. Hector was the first to approach, offering congratulations in his quiet way. The others followed, their genuine pleasure in the news warming Ruby's heart. That night as they lay in bed, Grant's hand rested protectively over Ruby's stomach. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted softly. "A wife, a child, a family of my own. After the war, I didn't think I deserved it." Ruby turned to face him in the darkness. "Why wouldn't you deserve happiness, Grant?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "I did things during the war, things that haunt me still. Followed orders that led to men dying, some of them just boys, no older than I was. Afterward, I figured the best I could hope for was a quiet life, working with my horses, harming no one." "And now," Ruby prompted gently, Grant's hand caressed her cheek. "Now I think maybe it was all leading me here, to you, to this child. A chance to create something good after so much destruction." Ruby kissed him, pouring all her love into the gesture. "You are a good man, Grant Quinn, the best man I've ever known. Our child will be proud to call you father." As Ruby's pregnancy progressed, their happiness only deepened. Grant was attentive to her every need, insisting she rest when tired, bringing her special treats from town, reading to her in the evenings as she sewed tiny garments for their coming child. The ranch hands were equally protective, rushing to carry anything heavier than a feather and watching her like anxious uncles. Ruby began teaching at the new school in September. walking the short distance each day to instruct 15 children ranging in age from 6 to 16. She loved every minute of it, finding fulfillment in shaping young minds alongside preparing for her own child's arrival. The winter of 1871-72 was milder than the previous year, for which Ruby was grateful as her body grew heavy with child. Christmas was a joyous celebration, with Emily and James visiting again, bearing gifts for their expected niece or nephew. The house echoed with laughter and music, the future bright with promise. In late February, as Ruby entered her final month of pregnancy, Grant received a letter that cast a momentary shadow over their happiness. The Army was reducing its contracts for horses, cutting their order by half due to budget constraints. "It's a significant loss of income," Grant explained as they discussed the situation over supper. "Not devastating, but we'll need to tighten our belts a bit." Ruby reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "We'll manage. The ranch is diversified enough with the breeding stock and training fees." Grant nodded, but concern lingered in his eyes. "The timing isn't ideal with the baby coming." "Babies don't need much," Ruby assured him. "Love, milk, a warm place to sleep, we have all that and more." The next day, as if sensing their moment of vulnerability, Edward Harrington arrived at the ranch. Grant was working with a difficult colt in the corral when the banker drove up in his expensive buggy. Ruby, who had stopped teaching the previous week at the doctor's insistence, met him on the porch. "Mr. Harrington," she greeted him politely but without warmth. "What brings you to Quinn Ranch?" Harrington removed his hat, eyeing her advanced pregnancy with calculated sympathy. "Mrs. Quinn, looking radiant as ever despite your condition. Is your husband available?" "I have a business proposition that might interest him, particularly given his recent setback with the Army." News traveled fast in Pahrump, Ruby thought with irritation. "He's working with a horse at the moment. Perhaps you could state your business to me." Harrington's expression suggested he'd rather not, but he nodded stiffly. "Very well. I understand the Army has reduced its contract for Quinn horses. A significant financial blow, I imagine." "We're managing quite well," Ruby replied evenly. Of course, but with a child on the way." Additional expenses. "It occurred to me that this might be an opportune time to renew my offer for the north section of your property. Given the circumstances, I'm prepared to be generous $20 an acre." Though the offer was a substantial increase from his previous one, Ruby knew it was still well below the land's true value. More importantly, she understood what that section meant to Grant, not just practically for the ranch, but emotionally as the heart of the home he had built. "The land isn't for sale, Mr. Harrington," she said firmly. "At any price." Harrington's face hardened. "Mrs. Quinn, I don't think you understand the financial realities." "I understand perfectly," Ruby interrupted, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "That land contains the spring that waters our horses, the meadow where our mares foal, the grove where my husband and I plan to build a swing for our child. It's not just property to us, Mr. Harrington. It's our future. Sentiment is a luxury, Mrs. Quinn. One you may not be able to afford much longer." The veiled threat sent a chill through Ruby, but she stood her ground. "Was there anything else, Mr. Harrington?" The banker replaced his hat, his smile cold. "Just a word of caution. The banking business can be unpredictable. Interest rates change. Loans come due. Friends become less friendly. It would be a shame if your family faced difficulties that could have been avoided." "Are you threatening us?" Ruby demanded, anger overcoming prudence. "Merely stating economic realities." Harrington turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mrs. Quinn, do give my regards to your husband. Tell him my offer remains open. For now." Ruby watched him drive away, her hands trembling with anger and a touch of fear. When Grant came in from the corral an hour later, she told him about Harrington's visit, trying to keep her voice steady despite her agitation. Grant's expression darkened as she relayed the banker's thinly veiled threats. "He's getting desperate," he observed, pacing the kitchen. "The railroad's planning a spur line through the valley, and they're eyeing that spring on our property for a water stop." "How do you know that?" Silas heard it from his cousin who works for the survey crew. "It's not public knowledge yet, but it explains Harrington's sudden generosity." That land would be worth a fortune to the railroad. Ruby rested a hand on her back, which had been aching all day. "What can he actually do to us? You said the ranch is paid for." "It is, but he controls the bank. He could make it difficult for us to get operating loans for breeding stock or improvements. He could raise interest rates on existing loans in town, hurting businesses we rely on." Grant ran a hand through his hair. "Nothing direct, but 1,000 small cuts. We won't sell," Ruby said firmly. "Not to a man like that." Grant's expression softened as he looked at her. "No, we won't. The railroad will deal with us directly once their plans are public, and we'll decide then what's best for our family." He crossed to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Are you all right? You look tired." "Just some backache," Ruby assured him. "The doctor said it's normal at this stage." But as the day progressed, the backache intensified, accompanied by occasional tightening sensations across her abdomen. By evening, Ruby could no longer deny what was happening. "Grant," she said as another pain gripped her, "I think the baby's coming." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and determination. Grant sent Caleb galloping to town for the doctor and Mrs. Powell, who had experience as a midwife. Hector's wife, Maria, who worked as a cook at a neighboring ranch, arrived to help prepare the birthing room. The men hovered anxiously, boiling water and fetching clean linens as directed. Dr. Wilson arrived just as Ruby's labor intensified. "First babies often take their time," he assured Grant, who was pacing outside the bedroom. "Everything sounds normal so far." Normal or not, the process was grueling. Ruby labored through the night, grateful for Mrs. Powell's calm presence and Maria's practical assistance. Grant was allowed in periodically to wipe her brow and offer encouragement, his face tight with concern at her pain. "You're doing beautifully, my love," he whispered during one such visit. "So strong, so brave." Ruby gripped his hand through another contraction. "Tell me a story," she gasped when it subsided. "About the ranch, about the future, something to focus on." Grant stroked her damp hair back from her forehead. "When the baby's a little older, I'll build a small corral near the house. A gentle pony for first rides. You'll watch from the porch while I lead them around, your heart in your throat the whole time." Ruby smiled weakly. "Go on. We'll have picnics by the spring and summer. Teach the little one to swim in the calm pool there. Plant an orchard that they'll climb in when they're older." He continued painting their future in words, giving Ruby something to hold on to as the pain washed through her in relentless waves. As dawn broke on March 15, 1872, Ruby gave a final, tremendous push, and their child entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the ranch house. "A boy." Mrs. Powell announced triumphantly. "A fine, strong boy." Grant, who had refused to leave Ruby's side during the final stage, wept unashamedly as the squalling infant was placed in his arms after being cleaned and swaddled. "Ruby, look what we made," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he placed their son on her chest. "He's perfect." Through exhausted tears, Ruby gazed down at their child, a shock of dark hair, red-faced from crying, impossibly tiny fingers curled into fists. "Hello, little one," she murmured. "We've been waiting for you." They named him Thomas James Quinn Thomas for Ruby's father, James for Grant's brother-in-law who had become like a brother to him as well. 8 pounds of miraculous new life, with Grant's dark hair and what already seemed to be Ruby's determined chin. The ranch hands were as proud as if they were blood relatives, each taking a turn to visit the new mother and child, bringing handmade gifts, a carved wooden horse from Sela's, a tiny blanket Miguel's sister had knitted, a silver dollar from Caleb to start the boy's future savings, a beautiful cradle Hector had been secretly building for months. As news spread through Pahrump, visitors arrived with congratulations and offerings, food from the ladies of the church, a handsome christening gown from Reverend and Mrs. Powell, books and toys from Ruby's fellow teachers. Even Victoria Harrington sent a silver rattle, though she did not deliver it personally. In the quiet moments between visitors, as Ruby nursed their son or simply watched him sleep, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this point. Less than a year ago, she had been trapped in Dugan's saloon, her future bleak and constrained. Now she was Mrs. Grant Quinn with a loving husband, a beautiful home, meaningful work, and a perfect child. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked one evening, finding her in the rocking chair by the window, Thomas asleep in her arms. "About how differently things might have turned out," Ruby replied softly. "If you hadn't come into the silver dollar that night, if you hadn't cared enough to help a stranger." Grant knelt beside the chair, one hand resting lightly on his son's back, the other covering Ruby's. "I think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be." "Do you really believe that?" "I do." He lifted her hand to his lips. "Every trail I rode, every choice I made after the war was leading me to you. To this." As spring bloomed across the Nevada landscape, Ruby regained her strength. Thomas thrived, growing more alert and responsive each day. Grant was a devoted father, often carrying his son in a sling across his chest as he worked around the ranch, telling the baby about horses and land, and all the adventures they would have together. In May, Ruby received a letter that brought her life full circle. The town council, impressed with her teaching before her maternity leave, formally offered her the position of head teacher for the expanded school, with an assistant to help with the younger children. The salary was generous, the hours manageable, and she would be able to bring Thomas with her until he was weaned. "It's perfect," Grant said when she showed him the letter. "You were born to teach, Ruby, and Thomas will grow up seeing his mother doing work she loves." Ruby kissed him gratefully. "I'll still maintain the house, of course. Perhaps we could hire a local girl to help with laundry and heavier cleaning." "Whatever you need," Grant agreed. "We're partners, remember? We figure it out together." Summer brought an unexpected development. The railroad company publicly announced their plans for the spur line, and as Grant had predicted, representatives approached them directly about accessing the spring on their north property. "We don't want to buy the whole section," the railroad man explained as they sat around the kitchen table. "Just 5 acres around the spring with an access road. We're prepared to pay $75 an acre." Grant and Ruby exchanged glances. It was nearly 4 times what Harrington had offered for a fraction of the land. "We'd need guarantees," Grant said. "That our ranch will still have full water rights, that the construction won't disrupt our breeding operations, that the trains won't spook our horses." The negotiations lasted several weeks, with Ruby often participating while Thomas slept in his cradle nearby. In the end, they reached an agreement that protected the ranch's interests while providing a substantial payment that secured their financial future. Edward Harrington's fury when the deal was announced was evident in his red face and terse comments to the newspaper, but there was nothing he could do. The railroad was a more powerful entity than even his bank, and the deal was legally binding. "He'll never forgive us," Ruby observed as they watched the survey crew marking the boundaries of the sold parcel. Probably not, Grant agreed. But he can't hurt us now. The railroad payment clears all our debts and gives us operating capital for years to come. Thomas's future is secure. As if hearing his name, the baby gurgled from his blanket spread on the grass nearby. At 4 months, he was a happy, sturdy infant with Grant's gray eyes and Ruby's smile, beloved by everyone at Quinn Ranch. Ruby gazed at her son, then up at her husband. When I stepped off that stagecoach last year, I never imagined this. I was just trying to survive. Grant slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. And now I'm truly living, Ruby replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Thanks to a cowboy who paid a debt and offered his name. Grant's laugh was warm against her lips. Best money I ever spent. Over the years that followed, Quinn Ranch prospered, as did the family that called it home. Ruby divided her time between teaching and ranch life, finding fulfillment in both roles. Grant expanded his breeding program, developing a line of Quinn horses known throughout the territory for their intelligence and stamina. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy with his father's way with horses and his mother's love of books. When he was 3, a sister joined the family, Emily Rose, named for Grant's sister and Ruby's mother. 2 years later, another son arrived, William Silas, honoring both Grant's father and the loyal ranch hand who had become family in all but blood. The old threats faded with time. Otto Dugan sold the silver dollar after a fire damaged much of the building, moving on to California to try his luck in the gold country. Edward Harrington died of a stroke in 1875, leaving his holdings to his daughter Victoria, who shocked the community by selling most of the properties and moving to San Francisco, where she eventually married a shipping magnate. Pahrump grew with the railroad, becoming a proper town with multiple businesses, a permanent school building where Ruby taught until she retired to focus on her family and writing educational materials, and eventually a small college where Thomas would later serve as an administrator after completing his own education back east. Through it all, the heart of Ruby and Grant's world remained their home. The ranch house expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. The land nurtured and protected for future generations. The love between them deepening with each challenge faced and overcome together. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1896, with their children grown and the ranch at its most prosperous, Grant presented Ruby with a gift, a journal bound in soft leather, its pages filled with his handwriting. "What's this?" Ruby asked, touching the cover curiously. "My side of our story," Grant explained, suddenly looking shy. "I started writing it that first Christmas after I gave you the locket. Just thoughts about how you changed my life, memories I wanted to preserve. I've added to it over the years." Ruby opened the book with trembling hands, reading the inscription on the first page. "For Ruby, who saved me while thinking I was saving her." Tears filled her eyes as she looked up at the man who had been her husband, partner, and best friend for a quarter century. His hair was silver at the temples now, lines of experience etched around his eyes and mouth, but he was still her handsome cowboy, still looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. "Thank you for choosing me," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "Every day for 25 years. Grant turned his head to kiss her palm, his eyes full of the same love she'd seen that April day in the church so long ago. "Best choice I ever made," he said simply, "and one I'd make again, every day for 25 more years. And 25 after that, if we're granted the time." They were indeed granted more time, nearly 2 more decades together, watching their children establish their own families, welcoming grandchildren who brought new joy to Quinn Ranch. facing the new century's changes with the same partnership that had defined their marriage from the start. When Grant finally passed peacefully in his sleep in 1915 at the age of 78, Ruby carried on, sustained by their children, the legacy they had built together, and the memories of a love that had transformed her life from one of desperate survival, one of profound fulfillment. And when she joined him 3 years later, she was laid to rest beside him in the small family cemetery on the ranch, beneath a headstone that read simply, "Ruby and Grant Quinn, partners in all things." The silver locket he had given her that first Christmas still hung around her neck, containing not just the picture of the ranch that had become her haven, but also a small photograph of Grant added after his death. Inside the back cover of his journal, which she had kept close until her final day, Ruby had written her own inscription. For future generations of Quinns, remember that love can find you in the most unexpected places, that second chances are possible, and that sometimes the greatest journey begins with a simple act of kindness. Our story began when a cowboy paid a debt and offered his name, but it truly blossomed when two people chose each other, day after day, through hardship and joy, for all the days of their lives. The Quinn Ranch continues to this day, operated by descendants who still tell the story of Ruby and Grant, the schoolteacher who became a saloon girl, the cowboy who saved her, and the extraordinary life they built together on the Nevada frontier.